The following audio is a sample from Ascendant Chaos by Dave Todd, which is now available on Amazon in paperback and for Kindle. More information is available at the end of this recording. Chapter 2, Identity Quest. Old Cut-Through, Abandoned Sector, Winston Enclave. Commercial Empire, Northam Continent. Thread, activate target perspective 1.view. I sprinted down the alley, eager to get back to the mission. The exploration, discovery, and fight were more than enough excitement for one evening. While my body operated on autopilot, my mind raced with unanswered questions. What had just happened? Who was that anomaly that defended me? The tall buildings obscured the moonlight from the empty streets, challenging my ability to find my way. I recognized familiar markers where squatters had settled in the abandoned buildings, which suggested that I was getting close to the mission. Even with the thought of returning to a warm room, I still felt cold, but it wasn't from the night wind. The sense of being watched from shadows poked at my thoughts. Without looking back, I ran as hard as I could down the twisting maze of side streets until I saw the welcoming lights of the Dwelling Street mission. I didn't wish to wake anyone on my way in, so I waited outside to slow my huffing from the run. I walked through the entryway door and closed it gently. I noticed a light in the hallway coming from Teresa's office. Apparently she was still awake, diligent in mission affairs as ever. I walked down the quiet hallway and paused as I passed the doorway to Teresa's office. Sensing my presence, she looked up from the slate in her hand. "Hey, Aaron, I didn't hear you come in." "That was the idea. I didn't want to wake anyone," I replied. "Lots of deep sleepers on the first floor, so I imagine little harm done. How was your walk?" Teresa asked. As she finished her sentence, I watched her eyes target my shoulder. Looking down, I realized that there was a large dusty handprint smudged across my pullover where I had been grabbed. I angled my shoulder away to deflect attention, but I suspected that my motion wasn't as inconspicuous as I would have liked. "Great, just got a little sidetracked, that's all," I said, doubting my effectiveness to feign innocence. Teresa's eyes narrowed with concern and suspicion, but she withheld the interrogation. "Okay, just checking," she replied with a smile. I started toward my room, but Teresa spoke up again before I could escape the doorway. "Aaron, has everything been okay lately? Some of the other workers have expressed concern. It's not like you to disappear for half the evening." Hesitating, my mind ran through an immediate exercise to weigh the decision of telling her about the evening's events, but I refrained because I already felt crazy enough without being able to explain what happened myself. "I just needed some fresh air. I thought it might be helpful to find something to distract me from my nagging amnesia," I said, allowing my voice to trail off. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Teresa asked. The way she worded her question immediately struck a nerve. I stared for a tick to sense any manner of intentional prodding, but I saw none. Teresa was both kind and perceptive, but I decided it best to write her question off as coincidence. I couldn't afford additional questions by inciting concern. Shrugging my shoulders, I turned in the direction of my room. "Well, get some sleep. I'll make sure Div locks up. Good night," Teresa said, returning attention to her slate. "Good night," I mumbled, walking down the hallway toward my room. Div and Therese had always been excellent listeners any time the mission workers had something to discuss. I felt guilty as if I had been hiding something, but I convinced myself that my fatigue was playing tricks on me. Entering my quarters on the first floor, I tapped the switch to the overhead light in my room. Ready to crash face first on my bed, I remembered the book under my belt. I reached to pull it out, but it was gone. Frantically, I looked around, but it was nowhere to be seen. I peeked into the hallway to see if it had fallen there, but there was no trace. It must have fallen out when I was running, I thought to myself. I smacked my palm to my forehead, angry with myself for losing such a valuable find. Accepting that there was nothing more that I could do about it, I went to bed. Ghost Encampment, Coastal Hills, Mainland. Martial Legion, Sheehan Continent. Thread, systemobserver.command. Multiple small huts lined the crest of the hill in a rural field along the mainland coast of the Martial Legion's dominant landmass. Although the former superpowers contributed to their share of conflicts during the global war, the sheer size of the Martial Legion's domain allowed numerous regions to remain unspoiled by the destruction. Such sparsely populated areas served the Ghosts well. Many residents in the urban regions despised the reclusive military protectors of the Martial Legion, but the Ghosts turned the need for secrecy into strength, considering that many in the Martial Legion were unaware that the Ghosts were responsible for diverting much of the warfare from the land. The Ghost's second-in-command approached the hut utilized by the general. Alex Corza reached behind his back and disconnected the long sheath hidden by his scaly leather jacket. He gripped the sheath just below the connected blade handle and held it by his waist as he knocked on the hut's door. It was customary to disengage all arms as a sign of respect. Upon receiving an invitation, Alex entered the low-tech command building, which was primarily comprised of wood, straw, and bamboo. "Come in, Alex. What can I do for you?" General Sato Sichi asked as he bowed from the waist according to Milesian custom. Returning the gesture, Alex walked into the command hut and complied with a hand gesture to seat himself. Alex paused until Sichi was seated as well before answering the question. "Sir, I would like to take a permanent leave of absence," Alex replied without expression. Sichi observed Alex's silence for a moment. The general had a great deal of respect for Alex. In spite of his challenging life, he had managed to rise above all difficulty to become a successful operative respected by all that he served with. Orphaned by a terrorist attack when his diplomat parents were killed during the beginning of the global war, Alex was forced to grow up as a stranger in the country in which he was trapped, with no family, in the middle of the greatest war to scar the planet. A local elderly couple watched after Alex for a couple passes until he decided to begin training with the ghosts. At an age younger than any of the other ghosts, Alex made his contributions to bring an end to the fighting. His youth, ambition, and success quickly pushed him up through the ranks, earning him a position just under the general himself. General Sichi felt that he had almost taken on a father figure role for Alex. "What has brought this on?" General Sichi asked. "I wish to seek other means to improve my skills, General. The ghosts are like my family, but I feel that I must move on. There is little more that I can learn here, and my desire to advance will not let me rest," Alex replied. Growing up in a harsh world, the quest for challenge had become ingrained in Alex's nature. The fighting in the Martial Legion waned since the global war. Even the smart wars required little attention from the ghosts to maintain order. Other than the ongoing feuds with local militias, the ghosts' responsibilities provided nothing in the way of new challenges. Additionally, Sichi feared that the ghosts' favor as the prime military force was diminishing in the eyes of the Martial Legion's faction leader. With political winds changing, Sichi doubted that the power struggles were the kind of contest that Alex would want to stick around for. Reluctant to reply, Sichi hesitated. "Are you sure about this?" Alex nodded. Conveying his disinterest with pursed lips, the general pondered his next response. "You are one of my best, Alex, not to mention the most decorated. But if this is something you have already set your mind to, then there is little I can do to stop you. So by all means, your request is granted." "Thank you, sir," Alex replied as he rose from his seat. Sichi halted him and indicated for him to sit back down. "Where do you plan to go?" With his typical reflective pause before speaking, Alex replied, "I thought I might do some hunting. I have heard that the lizards in the sprawl are enormous. I mean, like 2 marks tall. They ought to be more of a challenge than our last targets." The general chuckled at Alex's sense of expressionless sarcasm that he had grown accustomed to. "The sprawl is a wasteland void of life, nothing more than barren, sun-baked rock." "Well, perhaps I'll just work on my tan," Alex replied with his usual straight face. "The least I can do for one of my best operatives is to point you in the right direction. I have a list of known vectors across the globe, most of which live in the Martial Legion or the Commercial Empire, but there's one who I think might have the challenge that you're looking for," Sichi said. The faintest curiosity would have normally prompted Alex to run a hand through his neatly trimmed mustache and goatee, but he refrained and barely twitched his eyebrow. The change in facial expression with Alex could only be seen by a trained eye or by one who had known him for an extended period of time, and Sato Sichi met both qualifications. Catching the slight interest, Sichi continued, "I don't know his exact whereabouts, but I know that he lives within the abandoned sector of the Winston Enclave. You may encounter a lot of resistance finding him, considering that Winston is the Commercial Empire's most populous enclave, but I'm sure if you seek him, he will find you. He goes by the clash tag, the Enforcer." Alex received the list as the general handed it to him with a nod before he continued. "I suppose it isn't a bad thing that you're getting out early, Alex. I hear rumors that the Emperor is showing more favor toward the Draken. I know they aren't as trained, but they seem to consider themselves more expendable for the sake of dominating the military presence within the Martial Legion. I don't know what is to happen yet. Only time will tell. Alex, best of luck to you," General Sichi stated as he stood and extended his hand toward Alex. Following suit, Alex stood and shook Sichi's hand. "Thank you again, sir. Oh, and Alex, should you cross paths with that traitor, make sure you give him my regards. From all of us," General Sichi added. Alex required no coaxing to acknowledge the request related to a bitter memory branded into the hearts of most ghosts. With a nod, Alex turned and walked out of the hut. Dwelling Street Mission. Abandoned Sector. Winston Enclave. Commercial Empire. Northam Continent. Thread. Activate Target Perspective 1.view. I found myself once again at the doorstep of the mysterious library. I couldn't make sense of how I ended up back there, yet there I was, not an imprint in sight. I double-checked to see if I was being watched, but there were no signs of life in the vicinity. 2 men dashed from the library. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I attempted to yell for help, but my voice was caught in my throat. They charged, moving even faster. Before I could flinch, they were on the ground. I looked up and saw a phantom of a man who just kept staring, his eyes flashing behind those sunglasses. He disappeared. The attackers jumped up, taking their aggression out on me as they started swinging. My arms failed to respond as I tried to perform the most basic defensive maneuvers, but all I could do was succumb to the attack. I was about to become a bleeding pavement decoration. "No!" I yelled, blacking out at the first impact. I sat upright in my bed, tense yet relieved that I was only having a nightmare, but I couldn't explain the deviation from actual events. Possessing no desire to contemplate the intricacies of dream theory so early in the morning, I fought to regain my senses from my jarring slumber. I heard voices in the hallway, but the commotion in my room prompted their owners to silence and retreat from outside my door. It sounded like one set of shoes stopped near the office, and the other kept going until reaching the exit and the range of my hearing. While rubbing the drowsiness from my eyes, I felt something heavy on my feet. That something had been thrown on my bed while I was sleeping, the criterion I lost the night before. I was puzzled at the strange reappearance. I didn't know how I lost the book to begin with, yet there it was at the foot of my bed. A stiff knock on my door snapped me from my grogginess, followed by a shiny forehead and receding brown hairline poking into the room. "Come on, do you think you have special sleeping privileges these days or what? We've got work to do," Chuck said as he hurriedly retreated from the doorway. "On my way," I mumbled. Not only did I oversleep, but I also slept in my clothes from the night before. Jumping out of bed, I scrambled to find some clean threads. I disregarded the book on my bed, accepting that closer inspection would have to wait. I dashed down the hallway and out of the mission to catch up with the others who were already on their way to the first operation site for the day. The sun continued to climb the horizon, taking the chill out of the air. I took a deep breath and inhaled the cool air into my lungs. I accelerated to a jog to catch up with the others, only to drop back to a brisk walk once I was a few paces behind my associates. My mind mulled over the logic of the last few arcs. I considered telling Div about being jumped should it suggest a danger to fellow mission workers by venturing too close to clan territory, but doubts quickly stifled the idea. My thoughts were so wrapped in confusion that I completely missed that the others had finally come to a stop in front of an apartment complex. "Whoa, slow up, Fox," Div chuckled as I bumped into him. Towering at least a good 6 notches over me, he was hardly concerned with my lack of reflexes. "Sorry, Div, I guess I'm not awake yet," I replied. Div shook his head, laughing as he ran a hand through his short black hair. "No problem. A little spine strain ought to cure that. You and Chuck can start on the 4th floor. We'll meet you guys up there once we get the utility elevator operational." I nodded and took off for the stairwell, passing by the dumpster and carts that had been staged by the other workers. I heard Chuck's footsteps echoing down from one floor above. Reaching the 4th floor, I walked down the hallway to meet with Chuck, who was already waiting for me at the door to our first project. After acknowledging my arrival with a sideways nod, Chuck lifted his foot and kicked the door just below the doorknob. The aging wood offered little resistance as the door shot splinters from its frame and toppled inward. Disconcerted, I looked at him. "A little aggressive today?" "Fox, you've been around long enough. You know that this job requires a little adventure to stave off the insanity once in a while. Besides, we'll just fix the frame when we're done," Chuck said. "All right," I replied, conveying my disbelief in Chuck's intention to follow through on his claim. When we entered the room, I observed an all-too-familiar scene in the abandoned enclave. Ratty furniture and personal effects scattered the apartment. Apparently vagrants had already been through the place, leaving drawers half open and items strewn across the floor. Thick coats of dust mingled with the scent of animal waste, outraging the nostrils. I walked over to the window and pushed it open after feeling nauseated by the smell. Our latest project let us off easy for once. It was far more common to contend with carrion or bird droppings thanks to broken windows that permitted any flying traveler to turn the lodgings into an avian toilet. Rotten food stores often contributed to the aroma as well. I plugged my nose as I attempted to find another window to open. "Sheesh, Fox, it's not that bad. You should be getting used to this by now," Chuck wisecracked. "You're crazy. Have you worked in so many dumps that you lost your sense of smell?" I replied, rolling my eyes. "Possibly, but at least I don't have to smell your attitude, because most of the time, it stinks," Chuck quipped. "Very funny," I replied without motivation to make a comeback. Chuck always had a sharp wit about him, and I often enjoyed our debates throughout the workday. He moved to the abandoned voluntarily from the rural plains with a desire to be closer to civilization, even though he had reservations about moving into Core City itself, but his presence was welcome at the mission nevertheless. I found his insight on life to be thought-provoking. At last I felt my nausea begin to dissipate as fresh air circulated the room. With a boost of ambition, I began helping Chuck push intact furniture into the hallway toward the utility elevator. Academy Salvage Complex. Abandoned Sector. Winston Enclave. Commercial Empire. Northam Continent. Thread. SystemObserver.command. Seclusion was the perfect companion to the local clan salvage operation. Isolated in the midst of a vacant subdivision, the defunct Rouster Educational Center served as an ideal base of operations for Academy. Its numerous rooms and spacious halls allowed Academy to stockpile any salvageable wares they found before Imperial pickup crews passed through to take them off Academy's hands. In return for services rendered, Academy received free roam privileges as well as limited educational resources and supplies, even though they preferred the latter in order to maintain their lair. "What's the matter with you boys? You're really sluggish today. Did you get roughed up or something last night?" Bull taunted as he tossed the court ball around his back to Burnout. Trying to ignore Bull's trash talk, Jammer attempted to block the pass, but failed. "Why do you ask?" Sophomore replied as he guarded Burnout, who was looking for a clear path to the closest funnel. "One, because you look haggard, and two, because you've got as much game as a limp fish," Burnout mocked as the ball slipped through the funnel after a clean shot, in spite of Sophomore's defense. Swipe and Knox sat on the bleachers, laughing hysterically at Sophomore's poor defense. Knox's high-pitched laugh was enough to draw irritation out of Jammer. Sophomore passed the ball to Jammer, who was at the top of the court. Then with a smirk, Jammer nodded for Sophomore to get open for a pass, but he had already read the real signal that Jammer was sending. As soon as the ball bounced from the floor after Jammer's pass, Sophomore sidestepped, and the ball bounced out of bounds and upward, smacking Knox right in the face. "You fishhead, what's the matter with you?" Knox yelled, standing up from the bleachers, ready to throw down. His face turned red with anger, although the change was nigh indistinguishable from his ruddy complexion. "Settle down, Knox. You know he's not worth it," Swipe said with a grin as she teasingly flipped her blonde hair over her shoulder. After a few ticks of flailing his arms in protest, Knox finally returned to his seat on the bleachers. It was everyone else's turn to laugh as they noticed a huge, dimpled ball impression developing on Knox's face. Not letting up on the instigation, Bull snapped his hand in a whipping motion with the accompanying sound effect. He pointed his finger at Knox and laughed before returning to the game. Taking possession of the ball after Jammer's pass, Burnout decided to return to the matter at hand. He switched hands several times as he dribbled the ball in front of his body. Jammer took his turn to guard Burnout at the top of the court. "So what do you say, Jammer? I best you tell us what happened," Burnout said. "Liquid," Jammer said as a smirk creased his face. Bull took up position behind Jammer, preventing him from following Burnout to the funnel, but Sophomore reacted quickly enough to match Burnout's jump shot. Sophomore swatted the ball and tipped it out of Burnout's hand toward Jammer, who snatched the ball and ran to the top of the court, a formality in a small game with few players. "Looks like we're no longer on the hook to tell you or Jock anything," Jammer quipped as Burnout stepped up to defend the next play. Jammer faked to the left, then sprinted to the right, dribbling the ball until Bull jumped to block his shot. Reading the block, Jammer slung the ball with a sharp pass to Sophomore, who then jumped and launched the ball for a mid-range shot. Unexpectedly, another hand rocketed over Sophomore's well-placed shot and smacked the ball with authority. The downward force upset Sophomore's balance, sending him to the hardwood floor with a thud. "What are you doing, Jock?" Bull yelled, angered at the clan leader's interference with the game. "What weren't you guys going to tell me?" Jock asked in a demanding tone. Jock's 6-mark frame stood motionless as he watched Jammer help Sophomore to his feet. Everyone could tell that Jock's arms rippled as he flexed them underneath his pullover jacket. Bull and Burnout walked over to the bleachers to grab their towels and wipe the sweat dripping from their brows. Sophomore carefully lifted himself off the floor and brushed the dirt off his backside. Jammer and Sophomore exchanged glances as Jock eyed them suspiciously. The 4 spectators awaited the fireworks display as Jock's face turned red with impatience. "Everyone, out!" Jock snapped. The 4 proceeded to exit the gymnasium as Sophomore and Jammer waited for Jock to speak up again. Knox flipped a mocking hand gesture in a smirk, amused that the previous pranksters were in trouble. Catching the motion out of the corner of his eye, Jammer simply responded with a glare. "I'm waiting!" Jock snapped again. Sophomore folded his arms across his chest and then lifted a hand to rub his chin. Any marks from the previous night were barely visible amidst the splotchy regions from exertion that irregularly marked his otherwise pale skin. "We were jumped," Sophomore muttered. "I can't hear you," Jock fumed. "We got jumped," he said. "What's bent your verts into a knot? We were checking the library, just like you asked, when we found someone snooping around. We chased him out of the library, and then some fish," Jammer retorted as his voice dripped with sarcasm until Jock cut him off. "Whoa, whoa, whoa! You're telling me that you found someone in the library, and this didn't strike you as concern to tell me?" Jock snorted, his anger more apparent than ever. "Jock, we know what your policy is, but this guy was a noodle. He was no trouble. We could have handled him, but some guy draped in a black cloak jumped us from nowhere. Plus, he knew how to fight." Sophomore piped up, trying to calm Jock down before the protruding vein across his forehead got any larger. "And you have no idea who he was?" Jock asked, lowering his rage a pinch. "No shreds," Sophomore replied. "The person that we caught snooping looked rather curious, like he might have been from that local mission," Beyond that, there was nothing remarkable. Jock hesitated while his breathing settled back to normal. I hope you two realize that I have to answer to the Imperial authorities for everything that we find. We can't afford mistakes, especially when it involves people snooping around a hot zone like that library. If Jenkins catches word of this, our salvage privileges will be revoked. Now that's the last time I send you two alone. Get to work on the hyperlinks and find that carp. I'll send out the others to scour the area later, Jock said, twisting about to exit the gymnasium, leaving Sophomore and Jammer on their own to recover from the verbal lashing. Brecken's Lodging Complex. Abandoned Sector, Winston Enclave. Commercial Empire, Northam Continent. Thread. Activate Target Perspective 1.view. The cabinet groaned its protest as its corners dragged across the carpet. With one final shove, I pushed the storage unit into the utility elevator. I lifted my forearm to wipe the excess sweat from my face. All of the viable scrap metal from the last 3 apartments had already been relocated. I felt that it was time to let the team on the lower level do the lifting. Let's go, Noodleback. It's not break time, Chuck said. It is on my sun gauge, I replied, leaning against the filing cabinet to catch my breath. Getting pretty soft, aren't you? Chuck replied as he punched my arm. Yep, guess so, I said as I turned to stare out the window at the end of the hallway. The whole memory thing is still bothering you, isn't it? Chuck asked. I nodded. I can't shake the feeling that I'm meant to do something more than just participate in the hardware relocation program. If I know who I am, I'd have a better sense of direction. Let me ask you something, Aaron, Chuck continued as we headed toward the next apartment to shuffle more furniture in the warm, stagnant air. Do you think that your collective experiences determine your identity, or that your identity defines your experiences? Huh? I muttered with a raised eyebrow. You totally lost me on that one. Even though you cannot remember your past, will you let that hold you back from doing something of substance of your choosing? Chuck expounded. Flustered by my inability to answer many of Chuck's philosophical questions, I looked for a quick escape to change the subject. My eyes scanned the room until I found a target. Oh wow, I gasped. An intact picture tube MCAST. I haven't seen one of these in ages, I said, walking over to the wood table supporting the large appliance with a glass surface encased in a hard melt shell. Yeah, and? Chuck retorted, not easily amused. Even old obsolete technology can tell stories about how it etched its influence on history. Each iteration of technology supports that which follows, I replied as I walked over to the bulky predecessor of our much thinner Noptic screens. Yeah, whatever, Fox, Chuck replied sarcastically with a wave of his hand. I got your building blocks right here, he said, scooping up the ancient Mediacaster, walking it to the open window and tossing it into the air with a heave. I just stared with my jaw gaping in disbelief at his actions. How could you just do that? I stammered, as I waited for the sound of the device's impact with the sidewalk 4 decks below. Even from our elevated position, I could hear the concussion of shattering hard melt and glass spraying into the air, followed by the jingle of countless shards collectively sprinkling the ground. I soon snapped from my confusion as I heard Div yell at the top of his lungs from the street below. Cut it out, Chuck! Chuck shrugged his shoulders with a as he attempted to stifle a laugh. I notched my way toward the window, hoping to peek out without becoming the accused. Squinting, I noticed a greater irony. No more than a few boots from Chuck's crash site lay a pile of ancient MCASs and tech monitors from other apartments that other workers had already stacked into a small wall. He wasn't joking about building blocks. Nice try, Chuck said, trying to draw me back to his question. You're not evading the topic so easily. With a sigh, I went back to work and attempted to clear my brain of its perpetual fog so that I could fabricate an answer capable of putting Chuck's persistence to rest. Dwelling Street Mission. Abandoned Sector, Winston Enclave. Commercial Empire, Northam Continent. Thread. Activate Target Perspective 1.view. The setting sun cast various colors across the sky as it transitioned from blue to purple, red, and orange. The calming colors resonated with the relief that I felt knowing that another day's hard work was at an end. On the short hike back to the mission, my mind drifted toward thoughts of a shower, clean threads, and possibly a digestive tablet to counter the intermittent nausea that I couldn't escape as long as the day's odors remained attached to my clothes. After a prompt cleanup, I weighed the outcome of turning in early for the evening. Flopping onto my bed, I was quickly reminded of the previous night's adventure as my leg landed on the Criterion. It just happened to smack the bruise that had formed on my shin since the initial discovery. Rolling over, I picked up the book and looked at it. There was nothing remarkable about the plain cover or its shiny trimmed pages. I moved my fingers across its surface again to watch the intriguing title transition as it appeared and faded once again. Reminded of my curiosity from before, I tried to flip through the pages. Strangely, only some pages were accessible while others were sealed tight without explanation. Within the pages that I could read, I detected a large amount of what appeared to be antiquated dialect or philosophical prose. Disinterested, I was about to set the book down when my eyes landed on a set of words more than halfway through. Narrow is the gate, and difficult is the way leading to life. There are few who find it. Spotting the complete set of words that led to my adventure in the first place left me with a stupefied expression. If I hadn't already been sitting down, I certainly would have been knocked on my backside. I was so caught off guard that I didn't notice the knock on my door. As someone's fist rapped on the door a second time, albeit in a customary fashion, I snapped back to attention. Chuck's head at last poked through the doorway to make sure that I was present. "Hey, the game is on. Let's go." "Okay," I replied, tucking my prize behind me so that it didn't draw any suspicion. I wasn't interested in the evening's all-court lineup, but I didn't feel like explaining my absence either. "What's the score?" I asked, as I joined Chuck and the other guys taking up space in the padded chairs circled about the wide-based MCAST. 152 to 114, in favor of Fusion, Steve, our resident sports enthusiast, replied. With the game barely into its second quarter, the grimace covering my face did little to hide my disinterest. I can't stand that team. They haven't had anyone unmodified on their roster in over a pass. Every single player has organic implants of one kind or another. And that's a bad thing? Another worker chimed in. Well, I could play for that team and jump 6 marks into the air too if I had those modifications. Just listen to those commentators. They're trying to sell the hype, suggesting that anyone can have the dream when in reality only those in the commercial empire's good graces have access to those resources, I said. Fox, shut up. You think too much, Steve replied, clearly annoyed that I was the soggy blanket to his evening festivities. Contrary to some opinions, some say that I don't think enough, I muttered, casting a sarcastic glance in Chuck's direction. Sinking back into the lounge chair, my mind gradually tuned out the game. I was about to fall asleep when I realized that the game was over due to complaints coming from those who had hoped for a different victor. Feed 5, muttered one who was sorely displeased with the game and eager to watch a different Mika. My heavy eyelids shifted slightly at the change of translucent colors on the Noptic screen as the image morphed from all-court victory speeches to an enclave skyline. I easily recognized the Mika as a classic fight cast from its pre-war production style. The Mika was certainly a testament to the resources and creativity of a bygone era compared to the over-endorsed drudgery by current appearance standards. Since I'd seen the tournament Mika on more than one occasion, I normally would have tuned out the visuals, but instead it captured my attention with renewed interest. I shifted my weight in the chair to prevent falling asleep. While I felt that I had seen similar plots 1,000 times, the Mika's composition intrigued me. Like usual, the common struggle boiled down to the hero and villain exchanging trivial banter, only to result in the villain gaining the upper hand until the underdog hero summoned an inner strength to exploit the villain's weakness. As I watched the adversaries exchange blows repeatedly, a vague familiarity grew in my mind. Even though I couldn't help comparing the exchange to the previous night's events, I felt that there was something more to the struggle which I found relatable. The very nature of the struggle embodied my own frustration with an ever-persistent villain in the form of my personal quest for meaning. Nearly jumping from my chair, I headed for my room without revisiting the familiar outcome. The abrupt motion almost startled my associates. "Where are you off to in such a hurry?" Chuck asked. "I'm going to bed," I replied with more enthusiasm than a fatigue cover story suggested. I was certain that those watching the Mika returned awkward looks, but I didn't turn around to verify. With sharp focus, I went to my room, shut the door, turned off the light, and waited. Several arcs passed before the last of the late-nighters turned in. Once silence had become the norm, I peeked out of my room. Seeing no more lights, I grabbed the book from my bed and shoved it into my back pocket, hoping not to lose it a second time. I wasn't fully cognizant of the book's significance in my recent troubles, but I figured I should take it along rather than invite more trouble by leaving it in the open. Certain that my path was clear, I slipped down the hallway, haphazardly attempting to exercise my non-existent skills in the way of stealth. Upon reaching open air beyond the front door of the Dwelling Street mission, I bolted for the alley that caught my interest the night before. Trying to remember the path on the fly, I dashed through the dark side streets. Memories of the flight from the attackers mixed with a rush brought on by adrenaline. The mixture brought on a sense of caution and excitement, but I was determined to give in to the latter. I wanted answers. After stumbling over some trash in the alley, I found myself in the pale moonlight much like the night before. I walked cautiously toward the library, looking in every direction for adversaries. I crept up the steps to the library and approached the entryway, but I once more looked around to make sure that I wasn't watched. Turning back to the door, I placed my hand upon the smooth, cold glass, but what I heard caused my heart to leap into my throat and turn my spine into ice. "You have returned," said a low, booming voice from directly behind me. I whirled around to see the same cloaked figure who defended me the night before sitting on the Duracrete banister of the library walkway. Ticks ago there was no one there, yet there he was. Consciously I tried forcing myself to calm down, but my mind struggled with ordering my lungs and heart to decelerate their pounding in my chest. With all of the energy that I could muster over my panic, I replied, "Why did you do that?" Lifting his hands to remove the hood of his cloak, the man revealed the familiar bandana and sunglasses. As if oblivious to my question, he just continued his idle expression. Looking to the streets, he paused to verify that nobody was interested in a chase. As he did, I once again noticed the bizarre flash of color behind his shades. As my breathing settled, I took a step back and leaned against the library doors. Sensing no immediate threat, I folded my arms across my chest and awaited a reply. "Why are you here?" the stranger asked. "Perhaps I should ask you," I replied sarcastically. "Perhaps," the stranger mused. "But would it accomplish anything? I know why I am here. Do you?" Caught off guard, I hesitated. The eerie look-alike already had a knack for asking ambiguous questions. Here you stand in the dead of night on the doorstep to a building which, in its former glory, was designed to educate. It would lead one to believe that you are here to look for knowledge. Knowledge and learning require input, but perhaps you do not know the correct questions to ask, the figure said, in an inquisitive tone. I considered pulling the criterion out of my pocket to inquire of its origin, but I refrained. I squinted, trying to glean any manner of deception on the mystery man's face, but the darkness hid all expression that might reveal a clue. Already I felt like he was testing me. I knew that any witty response that I could muster would only come across as bumbling irrelevance. I wasn't about to explain my life story to a complete stranger in order to define my case, so I had to think quickly about how I best get to the point. I knew nothing about this person. My only impromptu solution was to parse his words directed at my attackers during the previous night's scuffle. "I'm here to understand the truth," I said, hoping to put a little stiffness back into my spine. "In particular, to understand the truth about my life," I added, after thinking about the text that I read in the criterion. I had no reason to expect that this stranger had any answers for me, but since I witnessed his deft resolution of Academy's attacks, I knew that I had nothing to lose by being honest, especially since I knew that I was completely defenseless against such combat skills previously demonstrated. With a head tilt and the faintest sign of being impressed, he nodded. "Follow me." An uncertainty crept up from within. I didn't know if the invitation warranted cause for alarm, but clearly my brain sent a signal to lock my legs in place. Alternatively, I told myself that if I risked nothing, I would learn nothing. Taking my earlier discussion with Chuck to heart, I accepted that I possessed neither a great sense of purpose nor a meaningful identity, so I really had nothing to lose. The internal conflict resolved in a matter of ticks, so I shook the paralysis from my legs and followed. Congrats on taking your first steps along an epic journey. Audio releases have been made possible through the generosity of Patreon members. If you would like to keep up to date on audio releases, visual concepts, or project updates, be sure to check out patreon.com/theenforceros. If you would like to read the full story in paperback or on Kindle, check out Ascendant Chaos on Amazon.com. Eyes on, it's going to be a wild ride.